Thank you, Mr. Jaffrey. I'm looking forward to this discussion. And I'm looking forward to chatting with all of you about how to tell great stories. It's the best of times and the worst of times for business marketers. It's the best of times because we have access to so many digital channels to reach our potential customers. And most of them are free or practically free. It's the worst of times because we have access to so many digital channels, and every other company does too. I've seen estimates that the average person, the average middle-class person, receives 4,000 to 10,000 marketing messages every day. How do you stand out in that tsunami of marketing? How do you avoid becoming lost in that huge welter of messages? And messages, by the way, that people receiving them must make decisions about every single time, and that's exhausting. And so your audience is not only overwhelmed, but it's also exhausted from decision making about all those 10,000 marketing messages. So that's what I want to spend a little time talking to you about today, about 30 minutes or so. And then we'll open up for questions and comments. So, how can you create memorable messages in a marketplace that's overwhelmed, that's oversaturated, that's overhyped, and that's exhausted? How do I switch slides, Mr. Jaffrey?
Doctor, you just click on the presentation on the PowerPoint.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah. There we go. Thank you. So, how do you create memorable messages? You stand out by telling remarkable, memorable stories. But good storytelling is difficult. To tell a good story, you need to appeal to emotion, to what some scientists call the lizard brain, the old part of the brain, the back of the mind, not the front. The front of the brain is where lists, features, and organization lie. The back part of the brain is where stories are to be found. And that's why we need to tell stories. We need to connect to that old part of the brain, the one that motivates people powerfully, the one from which they make their decisions. You see, the human brain is very, very good at a couple of things. First, prediction, and second, pattern recognition. So we have evolved to be good at prediction because we are a relatively weak species compared to the top of the food chain, the lions, the tigers, the woolly mammoths. Early on, we evolved to become prediction machines in order to stay alive, to stay one step ahead of those powerful predators. And we evolved to become great at pattern recognition in order to detect danger and opportunity as quickly as possible. We want to know every single instant, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? So to do so, we observe events, attach emotion to the important ones, and file them away in our memory. Those are little stories. That's how storytelling begins. And that's how the back of our brain works. And so to appeal to the brain the way that works best, we have to appeal to emotion and trigger that pattern recognition. And the way we do that is by telling stories, powerful, emotional stories. But when I look at most business marketing today, it's lacking emotion. In fact, more specifically, it's lacking three key things, each an aspect of the emotional side of storytelling. First, it's not urgent enough. Second, it's not memorable enough. And third, it rarely leaves any room for us, the customers. Let's look at a couple of examples. Now, there are lots of ways to explore company marketing. As I said at the start, there's so many channels. So to keep it simple and uniform, I simply went to the main websites of 3 large companies, and you can perform your own experiments with any number of companies, lasting ones that should know better. So I go to IBM.com. You should be seeing that on your screen now. And when I go there, I met with the headline at the top, Thinkers, this is your conference. Now, I'm not sure what that means, but it certainly doesn't sound very urgent. There's nothing I need to worry about right now, nothing I need to do now, nothing to suggest that anything here needs to jump to the top of my to-do list. It's not urgent, therefore I don't have to worry about it. And given my overwhelmed, oversaturated, overhyped state, it's gone and forgotten. Let's look at another example. Another huge company that should know better, GE.com. On GE.com, I met with a message, search here, with a confusing scrolling background of stuff like GE reports, the GE store, GE 3Q results, who cares? And something called balance the equation, whatever that is. If I don't have some specific purpose in advance, some specific question of GE, there's nothing to keep me here. There's nothing memorable about this page. Change the name, and it could be any Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, Fortune 5000 company. And one other example, Siemens.com. Here I find power generation at the center of the community. Now, there's not even a verb there. But worse than that, there's nothing for me to do. No action for me to take, no place for me to enter. It's a magazine where all the entries are things that are happening in and around Siemens. Why should I care? What's my role in any of this? Unless I'm already committed, I've got no reason to linger here. Now, I could repeat this exercise with hundreds of websites, hundreds of companies, hundreds of ads and marketing messages. I could pick many other channels. We could go to Facebook, Instagram, and so on if the companies are in fact there. It's all the same. These messages are bland, they don't grab me, they're not memorable, and they're not urgent. So how can these companies tell better stories? There is a better way. I'm going to quickly suggest 3 ways to improve your business storytelling, ways to make your marketing more urgent, more memorable, and to leave room for the customer to enter. First, how to make your marketing more urgent. Now you see here before you Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I'm sure you all remember from your college courses in psychology. And by thinking of Maslow's hierarchy of needs in a communications context, we can get a better understanding of how to make a communication urgent from a business marketing perspective. So Maslow was a young survivor of World War II. And in the chaos following World War II, he decided that he wanted to understand better how people worked in desperate situations like that and what they valued and what the ordering of their needs were. And what he saw was, at base, people worried most powerfully about physiological needs, food, safety, food and shelter, rather. At the next level up, they worried about safety and security. And then above that, love and beyond belonging. Above that, self-esteem, your friendships, your ties in the community. And at the top, once all those other needs were satisfied, then you worried about self-actualization. Self-actualization is completing yourself, learning a new language, or learning how to play a musical instrument, or how to write poetry, or be a better golfer, or something like that, something that brings you pleasure once all your other needs are taken care of. And Maslow's great insight was that people take care of their needs, people satisfy their needs, they have to satisfy their needs in this order, from bottom to top. So what that means is that the needs at the lower level of the pyramid or triangle grab us more powerfully than needs at the top. And if we turn this then on its head and think of it in a communications context, what this says is that if your audience is worried about their safety and security, and everything we understand about consumers these days suggests that that's what they worry about. When you ask them what's on their mind, they say they're worried about their jobs, they're worried about the future. It's a very anxious time we live in, full of concerns about safety on a world stage and safety in their own countries. And so messages that go higher up on Maslow's hierarchy simply don't grab people. They get overcome. They get trumped by the lower level needs. And so unless you're operating at the safety level, you're not going to engage your audience. And if you recall the IBM, the GE, and the Siemens websites, none of them had a safety issue prominent and up at the top of the website. So there's nothing there that grabs me in an urgent way. On the IBM site, there was a mention of cybersecurity, but it was lower down on the website. Now that's incredible when you think about it. The one big issue for technology, of course, right now is cybersecurity, and yet IBM has it lower down on the list. What's up with that? What are they thinking? That, at the very least, would grab my interest. So to make your marketing messages urgent, think where they come on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, how do you make your marketing messages more memorable? You do so by telling powerful stories. But most people don't tell stories. They think they're telling stories, but they're actually telling anecdotes. And so they tell stories along the following lines. I was at work the other day and I met Mr. So-and-so. And the other person says, yes, and so they're waiting for a story. There is no story. It's an anecdote. That's the way most people tell stories. And that's the way most business marketing organizations tell stories. They don't tell real stories because real stories are difficult to tell and they involve conflict and they involve a story arc and they involve a number of things I'm about to explain. But those are hard to do. Those are difficult to do. And so they avoid the difficulty and just tell anecdotes. And the good news is there are only 5 stories that are worth telling. These are stories that have been around in most civilizations for thousands of years, some of them as far back as we know civilization to go. And these 5 stories have stood the test of time and exist, as I say, around the world. And so the good news is you don't have to make up a new story. In fact, you shouldn't, because the human mind delights in recognizing the familiar with just a twist of something new. That's the essence of the way the human mind likes to experience reality. That's that prediction machine at work. We don't like to be completely shocked by something that happens to us. We like to be able to recognize it so that it fits into our abilities to predict. And so we like stories that have a familiar shape, but with novel and interesting details. And as I say, there are 5 of them. The first one is the quest. And this is the most common story. It exists in virtually every culture worldwide. For most cultures, it's the basis at the very root of the culture about how that culture works in some fundamental way. And the picture you see on the screen here is, of course, from Star Wars. And that George Lucas very consciously modeled on these ancient quest stories. So it's an excellent example. But the key to a quest is that it has 3 essential elements. So it has a hero. You see young Luke Skywalker here. And it has conflict. Behind him you see looming Darth Vader who creates the conflict. And most importantly, there's a goal. A quest always has a goal. Luke is trying to reach several things. He thinks he's trying to reach the rebel base. He's trying to reach the princess and help her out. But actually what he's trying to do, his real quest, is to learn about the power of the Force. If you've never seen Star Wars before, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But you do know the essence of a quest because you've heard a quest story in one form or another many, many times. And this one is typical of them. And you need those three elements for an excellent quest. So you need the hero, you need the conflict, the journey that the hero goes on to try to reach the goal. So it's hero, conflict, through a journey, and goal. If it has those three things, it will be a good quest. Quest stories show up in the business world all the time. There are quests to launch a new product, launch a new company, to achieve market domination, to open in a new country. Quest stories are everywhere in the business world. This is a very common story and one that people respond to powerfully and immediately. The second story that the business world finds helpful is Stranger in a Strange Land. And Stranger in a Strange Land stories are all about change. What happens is the hero, rather than trying to find a goal, is thrown into a new situation where he doesn't speak the language, or he doesn't understand the rules, or he simply doesn't know the terrain. And the still you see on the screen in front of you is from Planet of the Apes, a classic Stranger in a Strange Land movie where the hero is thrown onto a strange planet, which turns out to be run by sentient apes instead of people. And so he has to learn how to survive in that strange and difficult situation. And so Stranger in a Strange Land stories, we tell them when we want to persuade people that they can cope with change, or that change is the important thing that they should be thinking about. And certainly we live in a time now with high anxiety because of change. And so Stranger in a Strange Land stories should be used. They should be powerful and resonate with customers, your customers, strongly. And so you should be telling Stranger in a Strange Land stories, especially when you're focusing on change. Do you want to change a marketplace? Do you want to persuade people to change products? Do you want to persuade people to think about technology in a new way? Stranger in a Strange Land stories help us cope with change, teach us how to understand change. The third story is revenge, and don't be put off by the scary word revenge, because revenge stories are extremely popular. Revenge stories involve the hero perceiving some sort of disorder or injustice, and then the hero proceeds to try to restore the order, or try to bring justice to the situation. In this case, this is a picture from a movie from a few years ago called The Social Network, which is thinly disguised story of Facebook's origins, in which there were two sets of people who claimed to have begun Facebook, and they were fighting over who had the right to own, of course, the incredible riches and power that came with the enormous success of Facebook. And so it's a revenge story because it's about those two parties fighting it out. And revenge stories are frequently told in the business world when a smaller startup company takes on a larger one and wants to achieve domination because they believe they have a better product or a better service, or are simply more justified in taking down the big company. So revenge stories, again, very popular and very important in the business world. The fourth powerful story is the rags to riches story. Rags to riches stories bring hope to people, the readers, the people who participate in the story, that they too can achieve riches and wealth. So this is fantasy fulfillment for your customers. automobile companies use rags to riches stories all the time. Put me in my Maserati and I will feel wealthy and rich beyond my dreams. That's the idea of a rags to riches story. In this case, the still is from the musical Annie, where Annie was an orphan who had no money and few friends and no family, and along came Daddy Warbucks and he plucked her out of her obscurity and poverty and gave her a comfortable life. And so that's the fantasy behind rags to riches. It's a very popular story in difficult times, and works for companies that are wishing to provide a high level luxury product to people to make them feel wealthy and so on. And then the final story is the love story. And don't dismiss this out of hand just because we're talking about the business world, which is all about making money and dominating the opposition and that kind of thing. Love stories in the traditional sense, of course, and you all know these stories very well, are about a boy meets girl in the traditional way. They fall in love. And then typically in a love story, the boy does something stupid and they fall out of love. And the story is about winning the girl back by showing that you've changed. But the key to a love story is at the end of that love story, the boy and the girl get back together, and they know each other more deeply and more profoundly than they did at the beginning. At the beginning, they just fell in love with some image of the other person. But by the end, they know the person to be the flawed human that they are. And as such, a love story is really all about community. It says the two of us can get along, and therefore we can get along in a society, in a world, because it starts with two people, after all. Even though we know that the other person is flawed, even though we know that ourselves are flawed. And so love stories are about the possibility of human community despite our flaws. And they actually show up in the business world all the time. Every time a company talks about a merger or an acquisition or a joint partnership, what's astonishing is how often the language of love creeps into that discussion, and typically the business people are not even aware that they're doing so. And so they'll say, we're wooing this other company in an acquisition, or they'll say, we're flirting with getting together. And sometimes when it goes badly, they even talk about divorce. So the love story shows up in the business world much more often than you might think. So those are the five basic stories, and using any single one of these stories will elevate your marketing materials and make it compelling. You simply need to fill in and figure out what is the version, the modern version, the version that's relevant for your company that you can tell which of these five stories makes sense for your organization. And then the third and final way of making business marketing fascinating and engaging and relevant is to leave room for your customer, so your customer can imaginatively put themselves into that story. So how do you do that? You do so by going with their psychological processes, with the way the flow of their mind works. And so when you think about the human decision-making process, if I decide to engage with a company, or if I decide to buy a product, or if I decide to use a service, what is it that I have to do? I have to go through a series of steps to change my mind about this particular market or marketplace or company or organization or service. And I do that by first realizing that I need to pay attention. So the first key step in that process is framing it in a way that grabs the attention of the potential customer. You need to show me something that's surprising or startling or something that I would covet. Again, if I go back to automobile sales and automobile advertising, they always start with the picture of the beautiful car zipping through the scenery and going around the curves fast, and it's always exciting, and it's always picture perfect, and it looks fantastic, and that's what frames it for me. That's what grabs my attention. I think, I could imagine myself in that car. Now, the second step, though, is absolutely crucial, and the one that business marketers typically omit. And as such, they fail to engage their customers. And that is, they need to ask themselves the question, what is the problem my audience has for which my product or service is the solution? So the second step is not to present the product or service, this is what you need, but it's instead to say, we understand your problem. Your problem is that you need more sales, or your problem is that you need better technology, or your problem is that you need oil and gas, or whatever it happens to be. And when you show yourself you understand the customer's problem, then the customer starts feeling included in the story. And the customer can enter into that quest and be with you and be excited about getting to the goal at the end. If you don't do that, if you simply jump to the end before you've gone through the journey part of the story, then the customer doesn't feel included. So you need to go with the flow, the natural flow of decision making that that a customer himself or herself will go through. So if you use these three ways to increase the power of your corporate storytelling, you will be able to bring customers in a much more powerful way than you do just by using the traditional and weak forms of marketing that we saw on the three websites, IBM, GE, and Siemens. Just again to pick three examples that that could be one of many, several of many. First of all, make them urgent by locating them low on Maslow's hierarchy. Customers today are highly distracted and they're worried, they're anxious, they've got lots of other things on their mind. If you don't grab them low on the hierarchy, then they simply won't pay attention. You won't cut through their mental clutter. Second, you need 5 powerful stories. Is it a quest? Are you offering the customer some wonderful goal that they can achieve? And that the excitement of the journey will bring them pleasure to get to that goal, the anticipation of achieving that goal. Is it a stranger in a strange land? Is your message one of change, that you want to change the existing situation or change their lives for the better? In that case, you want to tell a stranger in a strange land story. Is it about revenge? Do you want to reestablish order? Are you offering them a vision of their lives that is chaotic and that you can give them order to make them feel more secure, or safer, or stronger, or better? Is it rags to riches? Are you simply giving them a nice fantasy about how much better their lives can be? Or is it a love story? Is it about joining together to create a better community? Know which one of these 5 stories you're telling, and tell them in order to tap into the ancient understanding we have of these stories, so that the customer responds with a touch of recognition and a touch of anticipation, both. So you fit in with their mental abilities, pattern recognition, and memory and storytelling. And then finally, framing the stories in terms of the natural decision-making process of your audience, taking them from the problem that you know they have to the solution that you're offering, will naturally bring them along the process of deciding to engage with your company. And if you do that, you will create powerful, urgent, memorable stories that will make your customers flock to your door. Thank you. And at this point, I'd be delighted to take any questions that you have. So I turn it back over to Mr. Jaffrey at this point.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Morgan, for a very, very interesting presentation. And folks, we are now open for question and answer. So if you have any questions, you could either insert it in the question box, or you could equally raise your hand. There's a hand icon available on the console, so please click on it if you would like to speak directly with Dr. Morgan. But let me go. There are a couple of questions already posted in the box. There's one. Dr. Morgan, can you give us some specific examples of applying storytelling to the business?
Sure, absolutely. And I think, of course, one of the old and great ones is from Apple many years ago, the famous 1984 ad and campaign, which was a revenge story. The idea was Apple was taking revenge on the bland, uninteresting, boring design and difficult technology that had come before it, and it was showing a better way. And so it used the imagery of the 1984 story to do that. But a more recent example, also a revenge story, there are really lots of them out there, is the Lyft organization that's an alternative to Uber. It's bigger in the United States, I think, than it is elsewhere, but you may have heard of it. So Lyft is a small, scrappy startup organization that's taken on the highly successful Uber. And so it's providing a modern revenge story. It's saying its alternative is a better way. Uber is not good in a number of ways, according to Lyft, and it's a happier alternative that treats its drivers better and treats its customers better, and so on. And so that's a current example of a revenge story used in all its marketing, and one that many people have responded to, so that Lyft gets huge leverage, even though it's a tiny organization, certainly in terms of funding, compared to Uber. And then the third one, and this is a bit risky, but I can draw on politics just for a minute. Regardless of how you felt about the last American presidential election, one of the candidates had a slogan that was a great revenge story. Make America Great Again is a 4-word revenge story. And so, leaving aside the politics, whichever way you voted doesn't matter. You need to recognize that Make America Great Again, that little slogan, those few 4 words contained the essence of a revenge story, because it implied that America wasn't currently great, so there's the disorder, there's the chaos, that it needed to be made great again, implies there's a hero who needs to come along and make America great, and it implies that at one time it was great and it could be returned to that happy state. And that's a classic revenge setup, and it allows room for the customer, in this case the voter, to enter. So those are 3 examples of stories that have worked well in a business or in one case political context.
All right, thank you very much. We have another one from Brother Murat. Now, Dolph, the question is, do you recommend to have one of the 5 stories, or can it also be a story that includes or covers all 5 stories? But that would be too much.
That's a great question, and it's really important to understand that you want to focus on one story at a time. Now, when you think in terms of the movie industry, because you have a 2-hour typically engagement with the audience sitting in the movie theater or watching at home, then you have the opportunity there to tell, say, a quest story and have a subplot or a second story that's a love story. And that's a very typical thing that Hollywood does in making movies. It gives you an overall, in an action-adventure movie, it gives you an overall quest story or a stranger in a strange land story with a subplot of love. So that works when you have 2 hours to tell the story. But think about the typical business marketing situation through any of the many channels that we have today. It tends to be very brief. And it's a matter of, if you're looking at a website, of a few seconds often, or if you're looking at a social media feed. So you have many little opportunities, many brief opportunities to grab your audience. And so you don't want to be telling more than one story. It's simply too confusing. The message won't come through. You want to pick one story at a time and tell it. Now, the thing to understand is that many business situations lend themselves quite nicely to telling different versions of the same story. You could probably imagine a company, take IBM for example, telling its audiences a quest story, a stranger in a strange land story, a revenge story, and on and on. But you don't want to tell them all at once. You want to take turns. You want to focus on one because your interactions with customers these days especially are so brief and so fleeting. So it's better to reinforce and take many little nibbles at one story rather than trying to do more than one.
Thank you very much. And there's a supplementary one. Can you please also exemplify this with successful examples of how companies conveyed those stories? I think it's you already covered, but if you want to take it again.
Yeah, sure. So you think about the many ways that a company can interact with customers these days. That's the good news. As I said, you've got many, many channels. And so what you want to do is introduce a hero, somebody who might be likely to buy your product or take advantage of your service. And that person, through any of the social media channels, through television advertising, through online marketing, can begin a story. And the great thing about these 5 basic stories is it doesn't take much to invoke one of them, to get us started on one of those stories. So you tell us, you give us the point of view of a hero, and you put a challenge in front of that hero and say, gee, I'd really like to achieve this goal. And in just a few words, you can invoke a quest story. And same with the other 4. So think of it in terms of, you don't have to tell the entire story. In fact, it's better not to. What you do is in all the channels that you have, all the ways you have of reaching your customers, you tell pieces of the story, and especially setting up the beginning. Because if you do that right, then what happens is the audience will naturally, because they know these stories so deeply, will take them on and finish them in their minds. They'll project themselves inside the story. It's what happens, to go back to the car advertising, and those examples where you see the person driving, usually from the perspective of the driver, very fast in these very cool looking cars and over very beautiful terrain, and we put ourselves and we imagine ourselves in that driver's seat. So that's a very simple and obvious example, but that's when it's done right, it's the beginning of a story which we, the viewer, complete in our mind, and then ultimately that leads us to going to the auto showroom and buying that car.
Thank you very much. We have a caller raise a hand, so let me go. We have Brother Muhammad Mustafa bin Tube. Brother, you have muted yourself also. Okay, Brother Muhammad, can you hear us? Could you please introduce yourself and ask the question?
Mohammed Mustafa bin Tube, Financial Advisory Services. Dr. Nick, thank you very much for a beautiful presentation. I am from Nigeria, and Dr. Nick, we have our image here is very bad when it comes to business because of various scams and insecurity, etc. But we also have very good people, honest, decent, hardworking. But the few people have given us such a bad name that foreign investors are very, very wary about coming to invest in Nigeria. But on the other hand, like the Financial Times said some time ago on the headlines, they call it bumpy road to high returns. So we have, especially in the oil and gas, we have the Shell, Mobil, Exxon for hundreds of years, and they're still around. So I'm going to make a presentation for some investors in London just before Christmas to come and invest in the oil and gas sector. I have very credible people with track record, but how do I begin the story? Which of these stories should I tell them? Thank you.
That's a wonderful question. And so how do you overturn a set of expectations that are out there and persuade people that investing in Nigeria could be a good idea and could bring them great returns? And so the thing to understand immediately is that, as you are keenly aware, that problem is already in their minds. And so you must begin by addressing that. And the way to do it, you can do it in a number of ways, but you could do it with a humorous touch. You could introduce the hero as the honest Nigerian who's trying to find other honest Nigerians. For example, you could put yourself and put the audience on a quest to find a safe, secure, and honest Nigerian investment. So it could be a quest to achieve that goal, and the journey along the way could be all about avoiding the various kinds of scams that they already have some sense of. And you could do that either very seriously, as I say, or with a kind of humorous touch. Another way to address it would be to say, to use the stranger in a strange land story and say, you think you know Nigeria, but you don't. The situation is changing. There are honest people and great business opportunities in Nigeria. And stranger in a strange land stories begin by being throwing the hero into the middle of that story and experiencing the bewilderment and the change and the unfamiliarity of the strange land. And so that one might be the best approach in your case, to say you think you know Nigeria but you don't, and it's actually time to give Nigeria a second look, something like that. That would be the essence of a stranger in a strange land story, and that might be one way to do it. I can't offer you much more detailed advice than that without knowing a lot more of the circumstances, but that would be one that seems to me would make sense. I would avoid the rags to riches. I don't think that would work.
Correct.
You don't want to give them a fantasy. They already think that there are too many scams, as you suggested, coming from Nigeria. So I would say Stranger in a Strange Land might be the best one.
Excellent.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Brother Muhammad, for asking the question, and thank you very much indeed. And we have another one, last question that we can take. Dr. Morgan, with such an information overload, as you rightly pointed out, how do we ensure that our story or messages on the homepage of our website is addressed to our niche target audience, yet still remain generic to cater mainstream visitors as well?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question, one that really troubles business marketers all the time, is you don't want to leave anybody out. And so you tend to make the message too bland and too broad, and as such it engages nobody. And the counterintuitive, the surprising answer there is that when you go niche, when you go specific, you think you're going to eliminate people, but actually if you provide a universal theme or a universal need or want, you can go very specific on the hero, on the customer, on the individual person that you're trying to, or the kind of person that you're trying to attract. And so think about it as a chance, say in a quest. Quest stories are often about the hero leaving home, going on a long journey to become mature or to learn grown-up ways of being, that kind of thing. And so you'd think that would be very specific to a culture or a situation. But because that desire for people to grow up and experience adult life is so universal, even though the story itself is very specific to one culture or one person, it nonetheless resonates universally. So the point is to think about, go as specific as you can on somebody who's going to look to your customer like them, perhaps, but make sure you include a universal theme. And that's the whole point of using one of these 5 basic stories. We all recognize the universality of a quest story. We all have wanted to reach a goal ourselves. And so even if I look very different from you or from your customer, nonetheless, we can all resonate with that understanding of the desire to achieve a goal, to go on a quest. Same with Stranger in a Strange Land. We all resonate with that situation of being thrown into a new set of surroundings and not knowing what's going on and having to learn the rules and having to figure out how to cope in this new land. And again, same with Revenge, where the universal theme there is we're perceiving disorder or injustice and we want to set it right. All humanity resonates with those kind of basic themes. So you can go very specific on the person, but keep the theme universal. And that's the power of those 5 stories.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Morgan. That really brings us towards the end of the webinar. Now, any quick concluding remarks that you would like to give before we dismiss out?
I would just encourage people to think about storytelling as an art that needs to be practiced. We all know these basic 5 stories. They are universal. Virtually all cultures have all of them in many, many forms. But it is difficult to tell your own version of that and to do it well. Most people, when they tell stories, either have too much information, too much detail, or too little. It takes practice. It's an art to getting the amount of detail right, to getting just enough information so you don't put your listeners off and you don't bore them, but rather you engage them. And so learning that art takes time and takes practice, and so you need to work at your craft as a business marketer. You can't just assume it's going to be easy. It's not, but there are great stories there. So you do have the opportunity to tell great stories if you embrace the opportunity and get deep into the stories of your company and of your organization. And so it's a matter of learning that art and persevering and getting those 5 stories, those traditional classic stories right, but figuring out how do they specifically work in my company. That's the art. That's hard work, but the payoff is tremendous when a company gets it right.
Well, indeed. Thank you very much once again for a very, very intriguing presentation. And I really want to thank you on behalf of the Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship for sharing this valuable information with us. So once again, Dr. Nick Morgan, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jaffrey. It's been a great pleasure.
Same here, sir. And thank you all of those who participated in this webinar. We are recording it, so please stay tuned to webinar.mile.org to learn about our upcoming programs or equally to access the recorded versions. With that note, I would like to end and conclude. So you all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling from. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much.